Caution. Please test and adjust the volume on all episodes before enjoying, especially when wearing headphones. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Greetings and salutations, fellow vessels of consciousness in the multiverse. And welcome back. It's been a hot minute. My apologies to you for the recent inconsistencies. For a show that touts itself as almost daily, it's hardly been that, if anything, more like almost weekly. And that, not even. Anyways, for those of you who may or may not be new to the show, a quick reminder, this is an experimental, freeform talk radio style audio blog podcast entertainment show for your listening pleasure. It's styled as if your humble host, I, an out-of-work actor, a living stereotype almost, although I'm more than that. That just happens to be one way you really could slice my life up and pare it down to, like, if you had to pare my life down to one sentence, it's like, well, he's just an out-of-work actor. That's brutal, and I do not like it. But I don't even qualify technically because I don't even live in LA. People assume all kinds of things about me, by the way, and that's a classic one. People just assume that I live in LA. All kinds of people all over the world have assumed that I live in Los Angeles, and I hate to break it to you, I do not. I do indeed reside in sunny Southern California, where, in fact, is none of your business. And because this show is anonymous, it's not about me, it's about the thoughts and ideas and concerns being bandied about in the world public discourse. This show is indeed quite humbly proud, if that can be a word, if that can be sandwiched together. We're proud with humility that the show, we, myself, and I, and DJ Zed, and and the entire cast of characters that sort of exist behind the show that aren't real, that are totally works of literary fiction, which we'll talk about if you haven't tuned into that part of the show. There aren't that many characters. I don't play a bunch of characters or anything, but I could be, I guess. We, the collective craziness, are humbly proud that this show is listened to in, I have 25 plus countries listed on the front of the page, and I don't know that that's accurate. I think that's a bit ambitious, but I know that in at least 20 countries this show is listened to. Join the, it says on the front of the page, for those of you who've never read it, over at Spreaker.com/show/ZenCast. Please come on by and show the show some show. When all you can show is showing, show your show. Sorry. I love that commercial, and it cracks me up when I catch myself in some sort of weird word slippage. Join the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, which is technically me, but also technically not me, which we'll discuss in a hot second, in exploring the radical intersection of technology, pop culture, politics, society, and spirituality. In a look, and I need to add this, in a look both backwards through time over the past 5 years of recent history, and of course moving forwards through time from our present moment now. In an unorthodox fashion, with digital robot dance music from another timeline. Warning, please be advised. And I need to state this a little bit more often. I used to try to do this in a big fashion once a quarter. I'm going to try to do this a little bit more often, just so that people know. This show is rated, quote, explicit, not because I talk about gross things or anything, just for being real, raw, and radically unscripted. Mature themes are indeed touched upon, and adult language is indeed used moderately. Curse words in and of themselves are not an evil thing, in my opinion, although verbal violence is a very real thing and is not tolerated here. And I wanted to make that delineation clear. I know there's, at least on social media, there's a lot of people willing to encroach upon that edge. And I don't want to be accused of virtue signaling here. I'm just being upfront and honest and transparent. I'm not interested in that sort of discourse. I'm interested in really getting at the meat and bone of serious questions, even if they sound a little science fiction-y. And I know that that's sort of the critical flaw of all of my projects as I present them, but we can put a pin in that on the giant corkboard over here behind one of my two shoulders, depending on where you're looking from. So I'm not gonna engage. At least I try to avoid, unless I'm really worked up about something. I think I have mostly succeeded. Although I will be the first to admit to you that I'm sure I've probably failed here and or on social media representing myself and or the show to engage in resorting to petty language tactics. Occasionally I get sucker punched into doing such things. I do recall one episode where I was kind of really fed up with a collection of ideologies, not necessarily the people touting them, but the ideologies themselves. And I might have gotten a little strong with my language. And I always forever regret that episode. But honestly, I don't remember which episode it is. I have to go back and listen to all of them and be like, oh, here's the one. That would take years. Anyways, it would take 5 years. Probably not. You could probably listen to all of my show in less than 3 months if you were the binge a product kind of person. Not begging you to, not asking you to, and most certainly not telling you to. So don't accuse me of it. I'm just saying. I'm just speaking abstractly. Speaking of which, where's the bit that says how many shows? Oh, that's on the next page. Okay. I'm not reading from a script, friends. I'm reading from my own, the platform that hosts my own stuff. So it's words I wrote. Disclaimer. And I just want to get these in because I haven't read them in a long time. And I think it's worth putting in the audio every once in a while. Just for people to ruminate on. Disclaimer. Please be advised that the original opinions, personal anecdotes, creative ideas, social satire, theoretical theories, and all other original intellectual property or content that could be described thereas expressed on this show, except for when otherwise indicated, are almost usually entirely those of the online creative performance artist persona known as the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, your humble host, myself and I. I use the word experimental in reference to the late 15th century use of the term as in having a direct personal phenomenological experience. Also, to have observed. From the medieval Latin, experimentalis. From the previous, whatever era Latin, experimentum. As in, I'm not here to preach to you things you should believe. I'm here to talk about things, and then, which I think I may be short on, present my practical real life experience vis-a-vis anecdotal evidence, which of course can be dismissed easily as to things that people could experiment with themselves to go off and explore. Fundamentally, just like meditation. If there's one thing I advocate for on my show for anyone who's approaching and is relatively new, is trying to figure out what the hell my deal is it's meditation. If you could summarize everything I've got to say into one sentence is yes, I understand how urgent it all is. Yes, I understand how horrible a lot of it sounds. And not dismissing anybody's concerns, no matter how intense they may be on the spectrum of possibility, because I understand something that's critical and at the center of my worldview, and that's that no matter what reality could be argued is the main line, and I don't like the word absolute, so objective reality, if we can agree that there might be some sort of thing that qualifies as that, not an absolute reality, because I don't like absolutes, but an objective reality. It itself, whatever that is, and I've shared this with you guys, dear audience, whoever's listening to this show, either today or in the near future, or in the long potential future, if should this survive many decades archived online for people to access, and slowly eke me out some sort of survival income the more people listen to. Oh, knock on wood. That'd be brilliant if just more and more people just slowly listen to it over the next 10 years. I sound sad and pathetic, and I'm not. Sorry. I get really self-analytical sometimes. What was I saying? I also distract myself with too many tangents and too many thoughts about the way I'm presenting myself and thoughts about the thoughts I'm thinking. Right. Reality itself is at the center of all things. So, and I think arguably, and this is something people may disagree with at first blush, but I think that if we have an open dialogue, we can get through a point of agreement. Reality itself, which includes people and their actions, and with some detachment, their ideas, ideological constructs, belief systems, etc. All the things that I give some distance, some removal from, like those things sort of live in a different shared reality, which is not necessarily inherently real or a part of any kind of actual perceived objective reality, right? But here's my shocking central pillar in terms of my personal worldview, which seeps into everything I say. That actual reality that we have collectively, traditionally, throughout history, mostly minimized, especially recent history, minimized to some sort of collection of objects that we label a place and presume to be inherently inert. In other words, although complex and involved in a lot of ongoing systems and cycles and natural phenomena that sometimes are a bit beyond our grasp, essentially free of any form of consciousness, right? I would argue that conversely to that, not exactly opposite to that, because it's not the exact opposite, but that we may have led ourselves astray by making that series of assumptions that led to that conclusion, that the objective materialist view of the world may be something we need to reevaluate because, and I do not posit this as a blind faith article token of belief that you must swallow and integrate into yourself, but rather I present to you as my understanding of the world based on phenomenological experience that you can go out and investigate for yourself and decide through, think through for yourself and come to conclusions about for yourself. But that I assert with a lot of confidence because they are indeed my original opinions based on my own personal life anecdotes and creative ideas inspired by that, with a mixture of social satire and a lot of theory, I'll admit, for which I'll have always, whether people accept this statement now or have not in the past, have always acknowledged a big, shocking, surprising, yep, I realize I could be totally wrong about everything, and the materialists could be right. But, and here's the catch about that clause, if I'm not wrong, right? Like if these are going somewhere down a path that leads somewhere worth investigating, why aren't we as a society, which is inherently a collection of different societies, which we must contend with and we must acknowledge, that's a whole nother series of talks, put a pin up on the board. Why don't we investigate it more thoroughly? Not to say that it isn't being investigated. Many, many millions of people are in their own ways and forms. In a sort of disparate collection of various social experiments, social spiritual experiments, as it were. Some of which are probably fraught with problematic issues. Some of which not so much, right? And some of which, who knows what's going on. Like any human endeavor, and I mean any, once you get a group of people together, you have two bubbling possibilities that come up. And I say this in the broadest possible sense. And I mean this with all the most nuanced possible caveats that you could bring to argue with about it. because I myself am not a fan of absolutist statements, right? So I'm not trying to get caught in aha, look at you making absolutist statements. But generally speaking, when you get a group of people together to work on things, whatever that may be, there's an opportunity for corruption and an opportunity for transcendence. But we don't really function. We just sort of point fingers, and we don't really address this opportunity for transcendence, which I kind of like blew right past the first time I said. Let me sort of just pause and restate what I'm saying for clarity, for my own clarity, as well as anybody following along. Any human endeavor is a fraught and complex phenomenon. Every individual is properly an individual and also functioning as part of a collective that has its own weird phenomena that must be addressed that we often sort of neglect. Some of which, I argue, land on the spiritual bandwidth of things. And we really sort of just generally stumble through life collectively, in a societal level, except in the nuanced, rich ways that people are doing culturally associated with spiritual practices of the ancient times and religious practices from back in the day. We generally, though, kind of stumble through life, even if we go to church or temple or whatnot, not addressing this collective spiritual phenomena that we could be using, and I hate to put it in this fashion, but to our advantage. Because I only bring it up, or I only frame it that way, because currently neglecting the spiritual avenue, as it were, the spiritual tool sets that some of us argue are inherently available to each and every human individual, at varying degrees of difficulty based on what the complex series of unique circumstances around each individual, right, are generally speaking sort of moderately underused. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. I say that in an assessment, in a Buddhist Zen diagnostic way. And that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But I back up. I can sometimes spiral deep down some particular rabbit holes and lose track of myself. In essence, if I can back up and summarize and find an eloquent button to land on, we live in a complicated world full of complicated ideas that have an apparent life of their own. And we take a lot of things for granted about this place, quote unquote, that we live in. And one of our obstacles as a collective society of societies, of individuals, is that we neglect this whole bandwidth of potential experience, which is meaningful and seems intangible from a materialist perspective, because the materialist perspective literally puts on like a set of filters, right? Ideological constructs inherently do. That's not some sort of snobby judgment statement or, a judgmental statement about people with ideological constructs. They serve a function, which arguably, as many have pointed out, going all the way back to Confucius, can, when used appropriately, be very useful to training this beast we call ourselves, this living animal that talks and is also a little bit on the crazy side of things, because the systems we have built are inherently sort of a little crazy making, but we need to learn how to function in the society that we are born into, and then we also need to learn how to disassociate ourselves from that enough, give ourselves enough distance from all these systems we've created, ranging from economy to education to da-da-da. We need to learn how to function in that and also learn how to escape it, right? Confucius points out that the two are meaningful, and it's an imbalance. It's a neglecting of one for the overutilization of the other that ruins us and sets us up for failure, because down that path is toxic madness, which ultimately, the reason you can't deny that it's toxic madness is because it becomes undeniably self-harming. Now, that was a big old complicated word vomit session of thoughts. Allow me to reintroduce our our delightful literary fictional character DJ Z to escort you to a quiet place of musical contemplation. Not so quiet, perhaps. And if you feel so inclined to get up and wiggle, by all means do. This is some robot dance music from the future. Well, technically not your future. An alternate timeline wherein this robot existed in what arguably would have been the future if you were... It doesn't matter. Let us take a quick audio entertainment break and return with some more organized thoughts about where this is all going, where this has all been, and where this is all now. And what that means in practical terms, both at a societal level and at an interpersonal level in terms of what I'm doing with the show, etc. and whatnot. DJ Z presenting to you some more recent stuff from his hitherto unnamed album. This is Sequencing the Fundamentals Once More, an orchestral trap remix live audio entertainment track. Some wicked sequenced audio loops for your entertainment friends from the Orchestral Trap asset collection that you can find on Remix Live. A note on all the music for anyone who might be mildly or extremely concerned unnecessarily. It must be noted by any and all listeners, new or old, that all of the music used in the show is indeed, in its own way, used in accordance with the various platforms from which they were acquired. For example, the old school original theme music that you heard earlier at the top of the show for the Almost Daily ZenCast and any of the previously aired sub-segments like, Almost Daily, although Almost Daily Zen I often use DJ Z stuff. All of that stuff, all of the theme show music, individual tracks, the ones that are used consistently at an intro with a pre-recorded intro kind of a thing, that's all stuff that you can also access and use for your own projects, available all over at freemusicarchive.org. That's freemusicarchive.org. So all that music I have been using in accordance with that platform. Most other music available on the show has been contributed with consent by the artists involved. Gazuda Music, DJ Z, Purple Mush, and the Political Outrage. Some of those are, partially me, as well as the more recent episodes featuring DJs from Twitch stream. So do not fret, dear listener, whoever you may be that is always worried about audio rights concerns. I do my utmost as a rank amateur to stay within compliance at all times. In fact, I would love for the funding of the show to increase to such a place that I could afford to invest in the audio assets available to me, both at a production level and at just a playing artist's new music level. And there's various, it being the future that we live in. Remember this, folks. No matter what timeline you think you've been in the past, where you are now, it's the future now. Welcome to it. We live in the future. And as such, there's the really new cutting edge platforms available to content creators for coverage to easily accessible music rights. It's a new competitive market. I'm not giving anyone a particular endorsement. I am acknowledging and giving thanks to the tools I have used and the musicians I've worked with. So special thanks to everyone involved and responsible for GroovePad, Remix Live, and GarageBand, of course. And as a blanket statement, any of the other apps I use, I hope to credit every time I actually feature them or use items created on them. For example, all the covers and other graphic artwork for this show is created with a mix of graphic arts apps available. I can't say exclusively on the iPad because some of these are crossover apps and are also available on Android, including Photoshop Express, not Quark Page. I haven't used that in like 20 years. That may not even exist in this timeline, Quark Page. Spark Post, that's it, as well as a host of others. So many thanks to the creative minds that make this kind of content creation tool available to people like myself and people like you out there in the audience. Okay, so what the hell is this show about? Welcome to the show. Friends, this podcast has been around for 5 years, and it's been a sort of free-form, spiraling out of control love note to humanity with a bit of tough love discussion, public discourse about some of the weirder things I see going on in the world. And before we go any further, I want to double down on a sort of disclaimer aspect of the show. I talk about it, what I feel like is too much. And I feel like I will be attacked with the she doth protest too much Shakespearean harassment line, which can sometimes be quite valid and be quite indicative of mindset. But I think I'm only flirting with that. But I think it's valuable, and because I do get randomly, on social media, I have been randomly on occasion accused of being a shill. In other words, being a production puppet. And I'm like, nope, it's really just me. I'm just a flawed human individual coming at you in a new chapter of their life after having gone through a lot and having been quixotically and quirkily, if somewhat unorthodoxly, fascinated with observing society from an impartial perspective. Very much like the age-old wisdom that children are not born with inherent biases. They're taught to them, no matter what the bias is: political bias, racial bias, spiritual bias, religious bias, insert any bias. Those things are taught to them either consciously and purposefully, or unconsciously and passively. I discovered myself. I became conscious of myself as a thinking creature at a ridiculously young age, for better or worse. Some days I wish I had been less so, and I could have followed a much more orthodox path. And I cringe at even saying that, but boy, would I love to be slightly differently positioned than where I'm at now. But also, I can't live with regrets, right? I mean, that's a whole nother issue. Put a pin on the board there, because regrets is something that's used peculiarly in language, and it means a couple of too many different things. And I'm not sure how I feel about the statement "no regrets," because we must at some degree hold ourselves accountable, must we not? And that's a challenging, touchy issue on all levels. But I digress. What the fuck is this show about? It is my own singular expression as an online content creator, a struggling, I would add, online content creator, humbly but with confidence, which unfortunately sometimes is interpreted as other things. I may speak with confidence, but I think I also speak with a connection to my humility and a humbleness, and a realization and acknowledgement that I could be wrong about everything. I could be way off base, but I feel, and that's a iffy way to put things, but I feel strongly, for various reasons, that as flawed as I may be as an individual, aren't we all flawed individuals? Who among us is perfection? I think that the questions and the ideas and the discourse that I feel compelled to engage in is worthy on its own merits, and that perhaps, if I may be so bold as to say, because it's not entirely all my own, creation, this sort of theory that I think, if I were a betting man, which I am not, if I had money to invest, which tragically I don't, this would be the idea I would be betting on, literally, proverbially, anecdotally, symbolically, and this would be the idea or the theory I would be literally investing in, as well as all the figurative ways that I could be investing in, and thus not being able to bootstrap it into existence myself. I share it conceptually for the world to contemplate and maybe help crowdsource. And that idea, I feel I may have stumbled around and sort of indicated at and laid a lot of the groundwork for in conjunction to my observation of the world and the current events we've lived through the past 5 years. But I may have failed to succinctly bring to a sharp point. And that's that, and you'll forgive me if I sound really crazy right now. To some people, this will sound insane. But reality itself is stranger than fiction. And reality itself is susceptible to our interpretive attempts to describe it. Whether or not I've been clear about that throughout my podcast, I'm not personally sure. I'd have to go back and review. But the reason that I make the arguments that I make is because this is fundamental to my understanding. Right? If you tell yourself you cannot do a thing, of course you will not be able to do a thing. That's sort of obvious, and many would sweep that away as just common sense, and why are we even talking about it? Which is a fascinating question in and of itself. Because what is common sense? Why do we hold any value to the phrasing, to the making of that statement, when evidence indicates that there does not seem to be any such thing? But that's a whole subject for a deep discussion in its own right. What's my message for today? What am I trying to get at today? My brain is spinning in a million directions. And one of the tasks I had listed for myself, besides playing 2 songs and making sure that I didn't ramble on for longer than an hour, was this: to return to something I want to make sure is sort of like a standard feature of the show that I do at least once a week, if not every time I'm on the air. And that's send a warm and genuine and authentic hello and namaste and thank you for listening to everyone in the whoever you may be, because I have no idea. I don't get specifics. I just get general, really, really, really simplified analytics through my what do you call it? My dashboard here on Sprecher. But we've got listeners around the world. There are vessels of consciousness from all over this living, metaphysical uterus giving birth to all life that are tuning into the show in a ever so slowly growing kind of consistent way, and for that I am deeply grateful, and I only just hope to create space to welcome and encourage and invite more. So a warm greetings and salutations to everyone tuning in from Israel, Chile, Australia, Portugal, Russia, Austria, South Africa, Ireland, the Philippines, Netherlands, Mexico, Barbados, Japan, Lithuania, Brazil, France, Germany, Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, and India. Thank you kindly for tuning in, and I hope that I'm at least weirdly entertaining to some degree to listen to. For any of you out there that are long-time listeners of the show, your deepest thanks for your returning attention. This really is an amateur effort crafted with love and a faltering acknowledgement that it coulda, shoulda, woulda be all kinds of more well organized and better presented. But I wake up every day and struggle with and live for this collection of projects, and wrestle with the demon, the roadblock, the obstacle of imposter syndrome and failure syndrome and has-been syndrome and all those crippling self-destructive syndromes of obstructionist thought. Like any artist, I don't mean to flagellate myself. Any and all creative artists, whether they label themselves an artist or not, whether they believe themselves to be trying to create art or succeeding to create art or failing to create art, whatever it is, to some level, to some degree, we wrestle with it. And I share that with you, audience, only because I hope it endears you to me a bit and lets you know that I hope to live up to all the aspirational thinking I've put into the overall ideas behind this project of projects. And if you're curious at what that means, this project of projects, and I hate to sound unnecessarily self-promotional, but it's a legitimate statement, or a series of statements I got to make. I humbly invite you to head on over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo, where you can visit 2 sets, and I wish there was a cleaner way for me to organize them, like some sort of color coding or some sort of space bar separation, but at the moment there isn't with the way this free service works. But if you go there to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo, you will be supporting this genuine, authentic, aspiring online content creator by visiting and sharing your attention to some of the other projects I work on. If you've only ever listened to the podcast, you may or may not have picked up on the fact that I'm experimenting with, finally, after much avoidance of, doing this as a live stream. Vis-a-vis the entry point of game streaming over on twitch.tv/Mr. Zeppo. So you can go directly to twitch.tv if you'd like, but also it wouldn't hurt in terms of just supporting in general if you came on down to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and visited the various collections, because as you will discover, there's a nice little handful of things that I'm trying to discipline myself into doing as both as online performance art, in other words, forms of streaming, whether it's audio or video or media streaming that I've created, or that I'm engaged in discussing, and narrative fiction, etc. You can also, the other class, the other sort of bucket of links you can visit are ways you can support this show, either by buying yourself an actual cup of coffee alternative mushroom products. There's 3 different products you can get a discount for, and every discount link click through brings me a little bit of associate support from the 3 different mushroom products. And it's a genuine, they aren't me. If you go and use the link, I get a little tiny bit of a discount / perk, but they're not paying me to endorse them. I genuinely, absolutely adore these products as a coffee alternative. I'm working through the fact that I still also undeniably love coffee. But if you are, like I was, struggling to find a serious alternative to your daily coffee intake that satisfies that need for a hot, earthy beverage first thing in the morning, but is other than coffee, I recommend these 3 products. And you can find the 3 distinct discount links over at solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. For those dying to know what it is, I won't leave you wondering. The products are Rise, Everyday Dose, and Mud Water. Go check them out. You can also virtually buy me a cup of coffee, because both of these support tip donation websites use the same terminology. It's one of them is literally called Buy Me a Cup of Coffee, I think, and the other one is Ko-Fi. For those of you who are, got the disposable income to spend and into supporting independent artists, I'm trying to branch out. Not only am I trying to launch a book series that I've been struggling to get some steam going on, but the muse seems to be with me and the sails seem to be billowing in the wind. But I'm also, trying to create the sort of typical array of merchandise and other products that I'd like to launch for the world to consume. But back to our discussion. The purpose of this podcast is bizarre and strange and multi-pronged, which is, of course, a weird thing, which may make it less enjoyable for some people, but may make it more enjoyable for others. If you have not yet listened to, and what did I call it? I need to switch over to that page. I thought I had this keyed up and I don't. I'm looking at my own show list. If you have not yet listened to Metathesis Core Pillar Explained, I humbly encourage you to do so. And know that it's just one of many pillars that hold up the sort of overarching architecture of my worldview approach. So let's try to string some pearls together. And I'll present them as I wind up this episode as a series of what-if questions, which both the backlog of my episodes have already begun to address, and which will recursively revisit in future episodes as I prepare myself to do this once again almost daily. And I hope you'll join me on that journey. What if, for the sake of argument, for the sake of exploration, for the sake of mental journey, what if the materialist world is incorrect in as much as that the limits that it imposes on reality are flawed, right? Based on limited understanding, limited perception, and limited technical capacity. And that those limits imposed on reality by the theory filter out actively from our mental cognitive processes of understanding the world, if we can create an umbrella term to cover many things, our processes of understanding the world through our cognition. If we are clinging to, and arguably any mental construct adds this sort of issue, but I'm specifically addressing the materialist worldview. Not trying to poo-poo it, I'm just saying its limitations become blinders, right? And if we wear that helmet, as it were, we're really limiting our ability to perceive. That's a full stop sentence. We're really limiting our ability to perceive. The fact that our everyday lives, generally speaking, in the broadest brush strokes possible, acknowledging all the exemptions and exceptions and flaws in the statement, we have generally, for many generations now, proceeded to condition ourselves to sort of normalize these limitations, even when we are confronted with our own capacity to see beyond the limitations. So what if the materialist view is incorrect in this fashion? And it's creating a set of blinders for our capacity to perceive functional aspects of reality that go beyond the visible spectrum, of which science itself, while it still is trying to keep or coordinate with the material the materialist theory, it's also saying clearly other things are going on. And if these other things are going on, they must be accounted for in our overall theoretical model. Okay, so here's some ingredients I'd like to add to that. Like I said, I want to string some ideas together. An additional set of what-if questions. What if this reality, beyond being not just materialist, is actually alive? Crazy? I don't know. The idea of a universal animas is ancient. Some would say it's primitive. It comes from a proto, underdeveloped human period in development, a pre-advanced society, pre-advanced scientific understanding, perception of the world. Okay, that may be technically, arguably true, but what is to say that humanity in that condition wasn't keenly positioned to live in deep, harmonious connection with this living reality? So much so that they took it for granted that it was alive. And what if that's meaningful? What if our dismissal of these ancient, admittedly mystical ideas, what if just throwing all of them away simply because they come from a very early point in human development, under the guise of judging them as primitive, undereducated, and underinformed? What if they are keenly well-informed in things that we have since then chosen to neglect and turn a blind eye to? Huh? Okay, now, in addition to that, because we can discuss that till the cows come home, let's just ask the what-if questions. We're not answering them, we're just asking them. What if the materialist limitations are flawed? What if reality is alive? What if that living reality is actively engaged in cognition as its primary function, and the mechanisms of our experiencing the world are inherently part of that cognitive process? That is to say, what if we are indeed a dream that God is dreaming? What if to create reality, reality is envisioning itself? What if, gathering all those things together, we try, in an attempt to update our model, we reinvestigate ancient, mystical wisdom, for lack of a better term, right? Let's call it that. Ancient mystical wisdom, and try to integrate it into our updated understanding of reality and see how much further we can go. Because one of the things that's kind of embedded in that cloud of what ifs is a theoretical clause that suggests that a normal process of all of those things, if they are true, is the following. If all of that is true, then our minds must work similarly. Now, curiously, if we step back and sort of set all that aside and look at just brain science, and not even necessarily the most cutting edge of brain science, but many studies, and I don't have them lined up in front of me. I certainly can't drop resources. Don't take me at my word. Go look it up. Go see what you can find and bring it to the discussion. But to my limited understanding, my limited capacity to have investigated this in the past, through documentaries and through reading of some articles, etc., there is an accepted model of cognition that suggests all of the human sensory apparatus is literally translating the information it receives about this, quote, objective reality that is external to us, transmuting it, translating it into electrochemical impulses, which it then processes and generates a holographic 3D model of inside our mind. Now, those two things are technically separate, right? The idea that the universe is alive and arguably in some fashion, which we may or may not be describing accurately, but that can be reduced to the mind-blowingly simple statement: the universe is alive, and therefore, arguably, it is the mind of God imagining reality. And reality is a very broad umbrella term, which most of us, I think, only very limitedly, take for granted, and that we all collectively could try to investigate further. But this thing about the brain scanning the world around us and then creating an internal model, which is then that which we perceive, right? Our perception is not the direct feed. We're not literally seeing what the eyeballs capture. It has to be transmuted, translated, and re-represented to ourselves before we actually perceive it. And that's something that can be measured, right? There's studies and tests about how fast the brain communicates sensory input in direct relationship to how fast the brain makes decisions. And one of the most curiously interesting, measurable, verifiable phenomena that's real is that when you try to pinpoint, and it's sort of like a human behavioral equivalent to the, I think, from my perspective, a sort of analogy. I don't know how direct the correlation is, but it may be a flawed analogy. But I think it's kind of analogous to the particle wave phenomena that is a problematic issue to many thinkers, and is labeled a problem. But that's also a very specific use from within science/physics. But if you're not familiar, we can spend days talking about the particle wave phenomena. But the bottom line is that functionally, in terms of how we can measure light, it is simultaneously a particle and a wave, and that it will present itself, for lack of a better way of constructing it, in one or the other, depending on which apparatus we devise to perceive it. The human mind, the human body, and the mind, and the sensory apparatus within the body-mind complex, because it's multiple things working in concert with one another, right? It isn't one solid state thing. The human mind seems to have some sort of quantum computation going on, because it seems to be not only modeling in real time that which the sensory apparatus, the data that the sensory apparatus is dumping into it, it's also modeling that which it anticipates might most probably happen based on the analysis of both the current live model, which is measurably, and it's at fractions and fractions of seconds, but it's measurably not as live as reality, right? The way you could argue that, really long distance satellite, like talking to someone that's just far enough away, there's a noticeable lag, and you kind of got to sit there and wait. That's an analogy, because we're talking about the time scale involved to measure electrochemical impulses in the human body. But the decisions are made ahead of the data being processed, which is a problematic thing. Now, there are many problematic observations about reality and or questions about reality which we can mix in. This is one of them, and I think that they might be resolved. I could be wrong, but I suspect they might be resolved if we investigate further these anticipatory what-if questions. These what-if questions are setting up a model that can be built the more we refine our answers to these what-if questions. What if those two things are simultaneously true, right? That the brain creates a holographic representation of reality and is probabilistically analyzing multiple probabilistic holographic representations of reality in order to anticipate the most meaningful next step. This is most succinctly and beautifully and eloquently exemplified in sports and in dance. There's studies been done on this. Athletes and dancers are making body movement adjustment corrections in proportion to danger, in relationship to danger, or in relationship to successfully executing the maneuvers they're trying to execute. And they're measurably making these decisions faster than the known speed of neuron communication. What does that mean, though? That's just a mind-numbing blah, 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 blah. Now, we need to step back. One of the other pillars of this whole, it's not even a pillar, it's the foundational construct, is fractalism. We could spend days talking about fractalism. I could throw you some shortcuts. Do your own looking up of Mandelbrot and his actual work. There's a scientist named Mandelbrot. Look up the Buddha Bro, which is a nickname to the Mandelbrot set depicted in 2D and set upright. There's a reason for that. Go find out for yourself what that is. One jumping off place that I authentically, genuinely endorse, because it's a great place it's got good information that I have come across independently before ever coming across this source. So I point to it as a really great place to start off from, and then you can go and look up the terms and the people referenced, etc. Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds. It's got multiple episodes, and they're each like an hour and a half, 2 hours long. But one of them is specifically about the fractal mathematics of sacred geometry. I forget which one it is. Go check it out, though. Okay, so what if reality, inclusive of the materialist view, acknowledging that its limitations must be swept away, that we experience material reality the way we experience it, and it is also alive. It is a living... material reality is the end result, the ongoing end resulting process, because it's ongoing, it's perpetual. The creation, I've said this before and I'll say it again, and I'll argue this both from a non-religious perspective and a religious perspective. Creation is not a past participle, completed action. It's not a past tense thing. It is a proverbial, never-ending, ongoing unfolding that is the very thing we experience around us. It is the sun shining, right? The sun shining isn't a static event. It is not a static object that happens to be hot. It is an ongoing collection of procedures or processes that are emanating, a collection of procedures and processes that emanate out and reach us and interact with us. Life growing, etc. That's the ongoing act of creation itself. And we literally exemplify that in the way our bodies grow. And we put a lot of mental constructs as obstacles in our own comprehension, communion with and deeper understanding and deeper ability to relate to that operational reality. That reality being the mind of God, creating its own very detailed, very, very real, very tangible material hologram that is itself alive and creating its own recursive, self-investigative apparatus for creating a mental model of the mental model. Fractals, once you get a basic understanding of them, are indeed self-recursive. Whatever they are, however they're depicted, whether a plant, no matter whatever else you can categorize it as or as not, is also a fractal. That statement cannot be denied, right? A rectangle is not a square, but a square is a rectangle. A fractal, if you just look at a mathematical fractal, the Mandelbrot is not a plant, but a plant is a fractal. The Mandelbrot serves as a meaningful and tangible, analogous, self-referencing symbol for what a plant is, which is a self-organizing system of creating ever increasing layers of complexity, which happens to be alive. Now you take that statement and you apply it to the entire process, and I argue it remains true. You follow? Reality itself, the dirt, the rocks, the earth, I don't give a shit what shape you think it's in. It is. It might be. It's a living vagina, yo. It's a living uterus giving birth to life, because the whole thing is a living fractal holographic system of systems perpetuating ever increasing layers of complexity, which renders, and I think that's a very apropos term, both mechanically, artistically, and metaphysically, it renders this phenomena, this ongoing phenomena that we simplify as this place called reality. And therefore, if we lift the blinders that we've imposed on ourselves, we will have a healthier relationship with this living thing we live inside of. Dare I say it. And that, my friends, to put a fine point on it, is the spiritual calling of our age. It transcends religion, it transcends politics, it transcends personal identity and ideological constructs and flaws and failings and da-da-da. It's rooted in forgiveness, because it has to be, because one of the ultimate conclusions that can be gleaned from exploring this and then trying to verify it phenomenologically is that it becomes really apparent that consciousness is a unity, no matter how you measure it. And consciousness, the capital C consciousness, arguably is like the universal foundation upon which all of it is fixed. If there's a fixed thing, to borrow the language from the Bible, which gets mispurposed to describe the earth as flat, it's the consciousness part. It's that divinity is what all things hinge on, no matter where they are, no matter how they function, no matter what function they're serving. Who cares, right? Blah, blah, blah. Taxes and the world's on fire and the thing and this emergency and that. Yes, those are all very real. Those are very valid. They are all part of the phenomena we're experiencing. And here's the kicker. Given the powers inherent with our own cognitive abilities, including such things as belief and the conscious or unconscious investment of energies, and the fact that whether we acknowledge it or not, we live in a living relationship with this living reality. And one of the things that reality tries to do is fulfill that which we believe. We'll have to put a pin on it there for now, because there's a lot to do today, and I've got to take care of my voice and take care of organizing the other things. Now, friends, I say that all of that, I say that to you with humility. I don't pretend to know for a fact. I think that there's a lot of sense in wrapping our brains around it and then trying to connect with the phenomenological experiences. And I keep coming back to that term because in my mind, in my assessment, in my, dare I use the word, judgment, direct phenomenological experience trumps articles of faith. Direct phenomenological experience trumps blind faith belief constructs. Not because it's inherently better, but because a blind faith belief can be held and never experienced. But a phenomenological experience is experienced. Period. Do you breathe or do you believe that you breathe? You breathe. You breathe air. And whether you understand that or not is a different issue. Whether or not you claim to believe that air is important or meaningful or that it must be clean for you to breathe it or not is a different issue. You breathe. It's a phenomenological experience. Your comprehension, your opinion of, your judgment of that phenomenological experience, that's where free will comes in. And that's where we need to heal, because that's where we let our spiritual trauma hijack our own ability to commune directly with phenomenological experiences. Why did I hinge up that argument, that final argument, on breath? Because breath is central to meditation. And if there's anything else you take away from this, is that that's where the rich field of direct personal experience can be accessed. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody's word for it. Listen to everyone's testimony. Get a diverse range of perspectives on it. Everyone's got their own favorite practice, right? You can listen to 100 yoga teachers and they'll all teach you yoga slightly differently. It's all the same thing, but they'll all come at it from their own perspective and their own experience. This is one of the things that are true about reality, is that it's relativistic. There are as many versions of reality as there are beings perceiving reality. Many of them coincide. Many of them diverge quite intensely. And you only need to take a deep breath and a big step back from whatever conscious articles of faith you cling to and put your feet proverbially, metaphorically, if not literally, in other people's shoes to comprehend that their beliefs filter their reality too. And that maybe, just maybe, given this cloud of what-if questions and the prompt to possibly investigate them for the purposes of discovering for ourselves and stepping into the true spiritual calling of not just our lifetimes, not just of this generation, not just of any particular movement, but of being a conscious being in the universe, right? I'm not trying to affiliate with any particular brand. I'm saying reality as our mother and our father, as abstract and huge and bizarrely difficult to comprehend as it may be, reality is our mother and father. They are bringing us into existence in a perpetual act that is to some degree self-sacrifice. But that's a whole bunch, too many things. The spiraling out of control. Got to wrap this episode up and play a little DJ Z music on the way out. Friends, I humbly thank you for tuning in and listening to this hour of the Almost Daily ZenCast. Your thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, recommendations are all encouraged, especially if they come from a place of wanting to engage in civil public discourse. You can interact directly with the show at Sprecher.com/show/ZenCast, I believe. Do I have that right? Let me double check real quick. Yes. And then just scroll on down to whatever show you had been or will be listening to. And then as you listen, comment along. And hopefully we get a little bit more engagement as I come to the microphone a little bit more often. DJ said, help me wrap this all up with a little bit of that new delicious melodic house remix live mix you entitled Underneath a Modulating Midnight Star. Should my point of today's episode be unclear is that, the reason we encourage each other to question everything is precisely, I think, because the beliefs which we choose to give power to will take that power from us. And that's something about the way reality works that we perhaps have been underestimating and or neglected. And it's associated with this long-standing, generations-old, deeply buried ancient spiritual trauma that needs addressing, which is the core rot from which our mundane problems in the everyday world stem. But we shall continue to unpack and discuss and revisit the things we've been discussing on this and future episodes, as well as past episodes of this show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please show your support. Share the show on social media. Encourage your friends to check it out. Visit episodes you have not listened to, etc., and shoot over your engagement. You can also engage with the show on Facebook at the official Facebook page for the Almost Daily ZenCast. As always, my humble thanks.